They didn't just bend the rules. The HOA completely ignored the law. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then the fines started showing up. Rules I never agreed to. Violations on property they didn't even own. When I told them they had no authority, one board member smiled and said, "Fight us if you want. No one ever wins." That's when I stopped arguing and started documenting. Because what they didn't know was this. Every threat, every trespass, every fake notice was building a case they couldn't escape. They thought rules protected them. They were wrong. By the end of this story, the HOA wouldn't just lose control. Karma would rewrite their rules forever. I bought the property thinking my problems were over. After years of noise, neighbors, and being told what I could and couldn't do, I finally found a place that felt like freedom. It wasn't inside an HOA. That was the selling point. The realtor said it clearly. No HOA control, she said. No shared rules, she said. Your land, your decisions. That mattered to me. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I wasn't planning to build anything crazy. I just wanted peace. Space. Quiet mornings. No letters taped to my door. No strangers telling me my grass was half an inch too tall. For the first few months, everything was exactly that. Quiet. Then one envelope changed everything. It showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. Plain white. No return address. Just my name printed neatly across the front. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Maybe a flyer or a local ad. It wasn't. Inside was a notice from the neighboring HOA. I remember reading it twice, then a third time, because it didn't make sense. It said I was in violation of community rules. I laughed out loud. I actually said, "That's funny," to an empty room. They listed things I supposedly did wrong. Fence placement. Driveway usage. Unapproved modifications. They even included a fine amount at the bottom. I assumed it was a mistake. Someone mixed up addresses. Or maybe a new employee didn't know the boundaries yet. It happens. So I did the reasonable thing. I called the number on the letter. A woman answered. Her tone was polite, but cold. Like she was already tired of me before I even spoke. I explained calmly. I told her my address. I said I wasn't part of the HOA. I said there must be an error. There was a pause. Then she said, "Our records show your property falls under our enforcement area." That didn't sound right. I told her again. Slower this time. I wasn't in the HOA. My deed said so. The county records said so. I paid no HOA fees. I never signed anything. She sighed. "Well," she said, "we'll look into it." That was it. No apology. No confirmation. Just "we'll look into it." I figured that would be the end. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, another letter came. This one was firmer. The fine had increased. Now I was being warned about further action. That's when something shifted in me. Not anger. Not yet. Confusion. I pulled out my paperwork. Deed. Survey. Property lines. Everything was clear. My land stopped exactly where the HOA boundary ended. There was no overlap. No grey area. They had no authority over me. So I decided to visit them in person. The HOA office was small. Clean. Quiet. The kind of place where people feel powerful because rules live there. Framed documents on the wall. Photos of board members smiling like they were doing the world a favor. I introduced myself at the desk. "I think there's been a mistake," I said. The woman looked up. Same voice as the phone. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a man I'd never seen before. He wore a blazer. Not expensive. Just enough to signal authority. He didn't ask me to sit. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "You received our notice." "Yes," I said. "But I'm not in your HOA." He nodded slowly, like he was humoring a child. "Our rules still apply to adjacent properties." That was the first lie. I knew it the moment he said it. HOAs don't work that way. They never have. Authority doesn't magically extend because someone decides it should. I told him that. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. A tight one. Well, he said, this is how we've always handled it. That sentence stuck with me. This is how we've always handled it. No law. No proof. Just habit. I asked for documentation. Something written. Something official that explained their authority. He waved his hand like it didn't matter. You can contest it if you want, he said. But enforcement will continue. That was the moment I realized something important. They weren't confused. They weren't mistaken. They were testing me. They assumed I would do what everyone else did. Pay. Comply. Stay quiet. I left the office without arguing further. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not fear. Focus. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. The confidence in his voice. The way he spoke like resistance was pointless. That bothered me. So I started researching. Not angrily. Methodically. County zoning laws. HOA jurisdiction limits. Case history. I read everything. I printed documents. I highlighted lines. I compared maps. Every source said the same thing. They had no power over me. None. The next morning, I emailed the HOA. I attached proof. Deed excerpts. Survey images. County confirmation. I wrote calmly. I believe there has been an error. Please confirm in writing that my property is not under HOA authority. The reply came fast. Too fast. Your concerns have been noted. Enforcement will proceed. That was it. No explanation. No rebuttal. No legal reference. Just a statement. That's when the fines doubled. And that's when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. They were betting I wouldn't push back. They were wrong. But at that moment, I still didn't know how far they were willing to go. Or how much they were about to lose. The third letter arrived on a Friday. That detail matters, because it felt intentional. Like they wanted it sitting in my head all weekend. Same envelope. Same logo. Different tone. This one didn't pretend anymore. It said I was non-compliant. It warned of further enforcement actions. It mentioned legal consequences without explaining any of them. And at the bottom, in bold, was a deadline. 7 days. I remember placing the letter on the kitchen table and just staring at it. Not angry. Not scared. Just trying to understand how people could be this confident while being this wrong. I read it slowly. Every word. They weren't citing laws. They weren't referencing contracts. They were repeating themselves. Authority by repetition. That's when I noticed something else. They had changed the wording. Earlier letters said possible violation. This one said confirmed violation. They were escalating on paper. I picked up my phone and called again. This time, no one answered. I left a voicemail. Calm. Professional. Clear. I've provided documentation proving I'm not under your HOA. Please confirm receipt and stop enforcement. No reply. Monday came. Then Tuesday. Nothing. But Wednesday morning, something happened that crossed a line. I woke up early to take out the trash. The sun wasn't fully up yet. The neighborhood was quiet. That soft quiet that makes you feel safe. Then I saw it. A bright orange sticker on my trash bin. HOA violation notice. I stood there longer than I should have. Reading it again and again. It said my bin placement violated community standards. Community standards. On my property. That's when the confusion finally turned into anger. Not explosive anger. Cold anger. The kind that sharpens things. I walked the length of my driveway and looked around. No one else had a sticker. Just me. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't automated. Someone came onto my property. Someone walked up my driveway. Someone touched my things. I pulled out my phone and took photos. The sticker. The bin. The angle of the driveway. The street. Then I checked my security camera. And there it was. A man in a polo shirt with the HOA logo, clipboard in hand, walking past the clear boundary marker, pausing, writing something down, slapping the sticker on my bin. No hesitation. No doubt. Like he owned the place. That video changed everything. Until then, this had been paperwork and stress. Now it was trespassing. I saved the clip in 3 places. Cloud. Hard drive. USB. I emailed the HOA again. Attached the video. This individual entered my property without permission, I wrote. This is trespassing. I expect enforcement to stop immediately. The reply took longer this time. When it came, it was shorter. Our representatives are authorized to conduct inspections. That was another lie. And this one was bigger. I sat back in my chair and let the reality sink in. They weren't backing down. They weren't reconsidering. They were doubling down. Because somewhere along the way, they had convinced themselves that no one would challenge them. I started noticing things after that. A car slowing down in front of my house. Someone taking photos from the sidewalk. A clipboard guy walking the edge of my fence. Each time, I documented it. Dates. Times. Descriptions. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't post signs. I didn't make a scene. I wanted them comfortable. Because comfortable people make mistakes. The pressure started creeping into my daily life. Friends asked why I looked distracted. Work emails felt heavier. Every envelope in the mail made my chest tighten. That's how this kind of thing works. They don't need to win legally. They just need to exhaust you. One night, I got an email titled "Final Warning." That phrase hit harder than it should have. Inside, they threatened to place a lien if I didn't comply. A lien. On property they didn't control. I knew it was empty. I knew they couldn't do it legally. But the idea alone was meant to scare me. That was the moment I stopped handling this alone. I called a real estate attorney the next morning. I didn't lead with emotion. I didn't complain. I said one sentence. The HOA next to my property is enforcing rules on land they don't own. There was a pause. Then the attorney said, "Send me everything." I did. Every letter. Every email. Every video. Every photo. Every note. When we spoke again, his tone was different. Measured. Serious. "They know they don't have authority," he said. I asked how he could be sure. "Because they never cite the law," he said. "They rely on pressure. That only works when someone is bluffing." That word stuck with me. Bluffing. They were acting powerful, hoping I'd fold. The attorney advised patience. Not silence. But strategy. "Let them keep documenting their behavior," he said. "The more they do, the stronger your position becomes." So I waited. And they didn't disappoint. 2 days later, another sticker appeared. Another fine. Another inspection. This time, the representative stepped further onto my property. Close enough to be clearly visible on camera. I could see his face. Clear as day. I sent that clip to my attorney. His reply came fast. "This is good for you," he wrote. That sentence surprised me. But I understood it. Every step they took was digging their own hole. The emotional toll was still there. The stress didn't disappear. But now, it had direction. Purpose. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was letting them prove who they were. What they didn't know was that they had already crossed multiple legal lines. And soon, they were going to be forced to answer for every single one. The first knock came in the afternoon. I was working from home that day. Laptop open. Coffee half gone. Trying to focus like everything was normal. It wasn't. The knock was firm. Not aggressive. But not friendly either. I checked the camera before opening the door. 2 people stood on my porch. One man I recognized from the HOA office. The blazer guy. The other was a woman I hadn't seen before. Older. Confident. Clipboard held tight like a shield. I didn't open the door. I spoke through it. "Can I help you?" The man smiled. I could hear it in his voice. We're here to resolve the ongoing compliance issues. Compliance issues. I asked them to leave my property. The woman spoke next. This won't go away if you ignore it. That sentence told me everything. They weren't here to listen. They were here to intimidate. I told them again. Clear. Calm. You don't have authority here. Please leave. The man's tone shifted. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That was a threat dressed up as advice. I didn't respond. I waited. The woman glanced at the camera mounted above the door. Just for a second. Then she adjusted her clipboard. We can escalate, she said. I opened the door just enough to be heard clearly. This conversation is being recorded, I said. You are trespassing. That stopped them. Not completely, but enough. The man's smile disappeared. We'll be in touch, he said. They walked away slowly. Not hurried. Like they wanted me to feel watched. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking. That surprised me. I wasn't scared of them physically. But there's something unsettling about people who believe rules don't apply to them. People who assume authority just because they've never been challenged. I saved the footage immediately. Then I emailed my attorney. Subject line, they came to my door. His response came within an hour. Good. That's harassment. That word hit differently. Harassment. This wasn't just about fines anymore. It was about pressure. Personal pressure. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No letters. No stickers. No emails. I almost let myself relax. Then the neighbor across the street knocked on my door. He looked uncomfortable. Like he didn't want to be there but felt obligated. I thought you should know, he said. The HOA's been asking about you. Asking what kind of questions? He hesitated. Whether you're planning to sell. Whether you're building something. Whether you're trying to lower property values. That one made me laugh. Lower property values. I had done nothing. Built nothing. Changed nothing. But that's how control works. If they can't force you directly, they shape the story around you. That night, I noticed something new online. A community forum post. No names. No addresses. Just vague concern. Certain properties adjacent to the community may be violating standards that affect us all. I knew it was about me. The comments were mixed. Some people questioned it. Others jumped on board. Rules. Standards. Appearance. The usual language. I didn't comment. I sent screenshots to my attorney. His reply was simple. They're panicking. That didn't make sense to me at first. They're escalating socially because legal pressure isn't working, he explained later. That's not confidence. That's fear. Fear of losing control. The next escalation came quickly. I received an email copied to multiple board members. The tone was different. Sharper. It accused me of being uncooperative. It accused me of deliberate non-compliance. It suggested legal action without naming specifics. And then it said something that crossed another line. Your behavior may expose you to personal liability. That was vague on purpose. Designed to scare. I forwarded it to my attorney with one question. Is that a threat? His answer came back in bold. Yes. At that point, he recommended we stop informal communication. No more explaining. No more back and forth, he said. Anything they say now becomes evidence. That advice felt heavy. Because it meant this wasn't going to end quietly. It meant someone was going to lose. A week later, the HOA made their biggest mistake yet. They sent a certified letter. Inside was a notice of intent to place a lien. It listed an amount. It listed violations. It listed a date. But it listed the wrong legal description. They copied it from an HOA property. Not mine. That single error proved something critical. They knew I wasn't under their authority. They were pretending. I brought the letter to my attorney in person. He didn't even read the whole thing. He smiled. They just admitted everything, he said. I asked him what he meant. This letter shows they're knowingly misapplying enforcement. That's bad faith. Bad faith. Another phrase I hadn't expected to learn. He leaned back in his chair. Do you want to end this, he asked, or do you want to stop them from ever doing this again? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the letters, the stickers, the visits, the pressure. I thought about the neighbors who would come after me. I want it to stop, I said. For everyone. He nodded. Then we do this properly. That's when he told me the next step. A formal legal response. Not a warning. Not a request. A line in the sand. And once we crossed it, there was no going back. The legal letter went out on a Thursday morning. I didn't deliver it. I didn't email it. I didn't give them a courtesy call. My attorney sent it certified, return receipt requested. Formal. Precise. Unavoidable. For the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting to the HOA. They were reacting to me. The letter wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Every sentence had a purpose. It stated, clearly, that I was not under HOA jurisdiction. It cited county records. It referenced property surveys. It outlined documented trespass and harassment. Then it did something important. It named names. Board members. The property manager. The enforcement contractor. Not the HOA as a vague entity. Individuals. The letter explained that continued enforcement would expose them to personal liability. Not hypothetical. Not someday. Immediate. It demanded 3 things. Stop all enforcement. Cease trespassing. Provide written confirmation within 10 days. If not, legal action would begin. When my attorney showed me the final draft, I felt something strange. Relief. Not because it was over, but because it was finally clear. That letter went out. Then we waited. Day 1 passed. Nothing. Day 2 passed. Still nothing. By day 3, I started to wonder if they were going to ignore it like everything else. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. A voicemail followed. It was the blazer guy. His voice was different. Lower. Slower. Careful. Hey, this is, calling regarding the recent letter. We'd like to discuss a resolution. Resolution. Not compliance. Not enforcement. Resolution. That word told me everything. I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney. He replied with 1 sentence. Do not respond. The next call came from the property manager. Then another from a board member. Each voicemail sounded more polite than the last. No threats. No rules. No authority. Just let's talk. Behind the scenes, things were happening. I found out later that the HOA board called an emergency meeting. No minutes were posted. No agenda was shared. That silence was louder than any letter. A few days later, a neighbor I barely knew stopped me while I was checking the mail. I heard the board's in trouble, he said quietly. I asked what he meant. They got legal letters, he said. People are nervous. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. When an HOA gets challenged, it shakes everyone. People start asking questions. People start wondering if other fines were real. If other rules were enforceable. Control depends on confidence. And theirs was cracking. On day 6, my attorney received an email. Not from the board. From the HOA's lawyer. That detail mattered. The tone was professional. Neutral. Almost apologetic. They requested clarification of boundaries. They asked for time to review records. They suggested a temporary pause on enforcement. Temporary. My attorney smiled when he read it. They're trying to slow this down, he said. That means they're scrambling. We responded the same day. No pause. No delay. Enforcement must stop immediately. Trespassing must cease. Written confirmation required. The next move surprised me. An HOA representative showed up again. But this time, they didn't step onto my property. They stood at the edge. Far enough to be safe. Close enough to be seen. He held no clipboard. No badge. Just his hands in his pockets. He didn't speak. He didn't knock. He just stood there for a moment. Looked around. Then left. That moment stuck with me. It wasn't confidence. It was someone realizing the ground beneath them wasn't solid anymore. That night, another email arrived. This one was internal. Someone had accidentally copied the wrong address. It was a thread between board members. I wasn't supposed to see it. They were arguing. One member said they should have backed off months ago. Another blamed the property manager. Someone else asked if their insurance would cover this situation. One line stood out. We assumed he'd just pay. That sentence explained everything. The pressure. The trespassing. The escalation. They weren't enforcing rules. They were testing resistance. And now, they were losing. By the end of the week, enforcement stopped. No stickers. No letters. No drive-bys. But we didn't relax. Because silence can be strategy. My attorney warned me. They may try to quietly rewrite the story, he said. Or pretend this never happened. That's when we decided to make sure it didn't disappear. We requested records. Meeting minutes. Enforcement logs. Communication histories. Everything related to my address. That request triggered the final panic. Because records don't lie. And the more they delayed, the worse it looked. A week later, the HOA sent their official response. It was short. They acknowledged they had overstepped. They claimed it was unintentional. They said enforcement would stop going forward. But they didn't admit wrongdoing. And they didn't address the past. My attorney read it twice. Then he looked at me. This isn't enough, he said. I agreed. Because stopping wasn't the same as accountability. They had crossed lines. They had pressured. They had trespassed. And if we let it end quietly, they would do it again. Maybe not to me, but to someone else. That's when we prepared the next step. Not retaliation. Not revenge. Justice. Filing the complaint felt heavier than I expected. Not because I doubted it. But because once it was filed, there was no pretending anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. It was a legal record. My attorney explained it carefully. Every claim had to be factual. Every word had to be supported. No drama. No exaggeration. Just truth. The complaint outlined a pattern. Not a single incident. Unlawful enforcement. Repeated trespass. Harassment. Bad faith actions. Dates. Times. Names. The HOA was served the following week. That's when things really changed. I didn't hear from them directly anymore. No calls. No emails. No let's talk. Everything went through attorneys. That silence wasn't calm. It was fear. Discovery started soon after. That's the part most people don't understand. Discovery is where stories collapse. We requested enforcement records. Maps used by the HOA. Training materials given to inspectors. Internal emails referencing my property. At first, the HOA delayed. They asked for extensions. They claimed records were hard to locate. They said some documents might not exist. My attorney wasn't surprised. This is where they start realizing what they've written down over the years, he said. And then the documents started coming in. Not all at once. Slowly. Carefully. Like they were hoping we wouldn't read them closely. But we did. There was an email from the property manager, months before my first letter. He's not technically in our HOA, it said. But we've enforced adjacent properties before. Another email followed. If we let him slide, others will try the same thing. That one hit hard. Because it proved motive. This wasn't confusion. It was control. Then there were enforcement logs. Entries for my address. Notes marked borderline. Comments like issue notice anyway. That phrase showed up more than once. Issue notice anyway. My attorney highlighted it and looked at me. This is bad for them, he said. Very bad. The HOA's insurance carrier got involved next. That usually happens when things get serious. Insurance companies don't like uncertainty. They like clear rules and minimal risk. Apparently, the carrier asked some uncomfortable questions. Why were they enforcing outside jurisdiction? Why were individuals named in the complaint? Why wasn't this stopped earlier? Board members started to shift. We could see it in the emails. Some wanted to settle quietly. Others wanted to fight. A few stopped responding altogether. One board member resigned. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. Then another followed. The community forum noticed. People started asking why leadership was changing so suddenly. The HOA posted a vague message about personal reasons. But inside, the panic was real. Discovery revealed something else. They had done this before. Not to me. To 2 other adjacent property owners over the years. One paid. One sold. Neither challenged it. That pattern mattered. It showed intent. My attorney added an amendment. The complaint now included a request for injunctive relief. In simple terms, that meant the court could permanently stop the HOA from doing this again. Not just to me. To anyone. That raised the stakes. Settlement talks began quietly. The HOA's lawyer reached out. They wanted to resolve it amicably. That word again. Amicably means quietly. We listened. They offered to stop enforcement permanently. They offered to waive all fines. They offered to clarify boundaries publicly. But they didn't want to admit wrongdoing. And they didn't want changes in their bylaws. My attorney asked me what I wanted. I thought about it. The stress. The nights I didn't sleep. The pressure on my work. The fear they tried to create. I want it to end, I said. But I also want it fixed. So we countered. Permanent injunction. Policy changes. Written acknowledgement of lack of authority. Reimbursement of legal fees. That last part changed the tone. The HOA hesitated. Then their insurance carrier stepped in again. Because legal fees add up. And bad precedent costs more. That's when the real blame started. Emails became defensive. People pointed fingers. The property manager was suddenly no longer employed. I found that out from a neighbor. They fired someone, he said. Over some legal thing. I didn't correct him. The truth was bigger than that. By the end of the month, the HOA agreed to mediation. Not because they wanted peace. Because they were running out of options. The power they thought they had was slipping. And they knew if this reached a judge, the rules wouldn't be theirs anymore. Mediation was scheduled for a Monday morning. Neutral office. Plain walls. No audience. No drama. Just people and facts. I arrived early with my attorney. We didn't speak much. There was nothing left to prepare. Everything that mattered was already on paper. The HOA arrived in pieces. First, their lawyer. Then 2 board members. The third chair was empty. One of them looked tired. The other looked angry. That contrast said more than words. The mediator explained the rules. Confidentiality. Respect. No interruptions. Then he asked the HOA to explain their position. They spoke carefully. They said it was a misunderstanding. They said boundaries were confusing. They said enforcement was well-intentioned. I watched their faces while they talked. They weren't confident. They were cautious. When it was our turn, my attorney didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He laid out the timeline. The first letter. The proof sent. The trespass video. The threats. The certified lien notice with the wrong legal description. Then he read from their own emails. Word for word. He's not technically in our HOA. Issue notice anyway. We assumed he'd just pay. The room changed. One board member shifted in his seat. The other stared at the table. The mediator asked a simple question. Did you know you lacked authority? Silence. That silence lasted longer than any argument could. Finally, one board member spoke. We believed enforcement would encourage compliance. The mediator nodded slowly. Compliance with what? He asked. No answer. That was the moment control broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Because once authority is questioned out loud, it doesn't come back. The mediator took a break. Private rooms. My attorney asked how I felt. Tired, I said. But clear. He nodded. When we came back together, the tone had shifted. The HOA's lawyer spoke first. They were willing to agree to a permanent injunction. They would formally acknowledge no authority over my property. They would update their enforcement policies. But they wanted confidentiality. No admission of wrongdoing. No public statement. My attorney turned to me. This was my decision. I thought about the neighbors. The ones who paid. The one who sold. I want it on record, I said. Not hidden. The HOA's lawyer hesitated. The mediator leaned forward. If this goes to court, he said calmly, the record will be public. That changed everything. They asked for another break. When they returned, one board member looked defeated. They agreed. A written acknowledgement. Policy changes. Notice to the community. Payment of my legal fees. Not all of them. But enough. Mediation ended without handshakes. Just signatures. When I walked out, the air felt different. Lighter. But it wasn't over yet. Because agreements mean nothing until they're enforced. And enforcement was about to shift. The day the agreement went public, everything changed. A letter was sent to all HOA members. It clearly stated the boundaries. It acknowledged that I was not under their authority. It outlined new enforcement policies to prevent future abuse. The tone was neutral, professional, and factual. No excuses. No dramatics. Just the facts. I watched reactions quietly. Neighbors whispered. Some were confused. Others relieved. A few approached me cautiously. I didn't know this was happening, one said. I thought the HOA was always right. Another neighbor smiled. Finally, someone stood up. It felt strange. I wasn't seeking attention. But justice isn't always quiet. Inside the HOA, the atmosphere was different. Board members who once walked confidently through the neighborhood were now cautious. Meetings were shorter. Discussions more measured. The property manager, the one who had walked on my driveway without permission, had resigned quietly. Insurance companies followed up. They required written reports, confirmations, and policy updates. The HOA had to comply or risk losing coverage. I realized something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about accountability. A precedent had been set. Other adjacent property owners now knew their rights. The community started questioning past fines, enforcement actions, and decisions. Some former victims contacted my attorney for guidance. The ripple effect was real. For me, the satisfaction wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving the HOA wrong. It was about seeing law and fairness prevail. I could finally enjoy my property, walk my driveway, keep my trash bin where it belongs, live without fear of arbitrary fines or trespass. The experience also taught me patience. Powerful people often rely on intimidation. They count on compliance, silence, or fear. But when facts, documentation, and law are on your side, pressure loses its weight. The HOA learned a lesson. The community learned a lesson. I learned a lesson. And sometimes, justice doesn't roar. It whispers through letters, documents, and rules rewritten. Weeks after mediation, the permanent injunction was finalized. The court approved it without dispute. The HOA was legally bound to stop enforcement over my property. They had to maintain updated records. They had to notify the community. And they had to reimburse my legal fees. Seeing the court documents for the first time was surreal. Not because I expected anything different, but because paper, signatures, and stamps carry a weight that letters, calls, and voicemails never do. It wasn't about winning a fight anymore. It was about cementing accountability. The HOA board members were no longer just cautious, they were careful. Every decision, Every communication, every meeting was monitored and logged. They knew now that missteps had real consequences. Some former board members faced criticism in the community for prior abuses. Some quietly stepped away from leadership roles. And the property manager never returned to enforcement duties. Neighborhood forums became more balanced. People started discussing rules with a clear understanding of legal boundaries. Parents, homeowners, even new residents began asking questions instead of assuming authority automatically applied. For me, the personal relief was almost unbelievable. I could walk my property, make decisions about my land, and live without anxiety over arbitrary fines. Every morning coffee on my porch became a small celebration of patience, documentation, and persistence. I also reflected on the lessons learned. Power isn't always about right or wrong. It's about perception. When people believe they can act unchecked, they often do. But facts, records, and persistence change perceptions. And once perception changes, power shifts. I didn't celebrate their failure. I acknowledged that the system worked as it should when used correctly. The law protected me because I followed the law, documented carefully, and sought the right advice. True peace returned slowly. Not immediately. Trust needed time to rebuild. Every suspicious letter, every glance from someone in the HOA, reminded me that victory isn't just about stopping them once, it's about making sure abuse doesn't repeat. By the end of the month, I felt something I hadn't in years. Genuine calm. Not because the HOA would never try again, but because I now knew I could handle it. And because the rules were finally clear. After the injunction and mediation, word spread quietly. Neighbors started asking questions. I didn't know the HOA could do that, one said. Are you serious? They fined people outside their jurisdiction. Another asked. It became clear the problem wasn't just mine. Other homeowners had silently suffered for years. Some paid fines. Some gave in quietly. Some sold their property just to escape the overreach. I began receiving discreet messages from a few of them. Thank you for standing up, one wrote. You showed me I have rights too, said another. The quiet ripple surprised me. My persistence was now giving courage to others. At community meetings, the conversation started shifting. People discussed enforcement policies with clarity. Questions were asked publicly. Board members answered carefully. The fear that had been cultivated for years evaporated. Not instantly. Not completely. But the tone had changed. Some board members were defensive. Some offered explanations. Others avoided questions entirely. It was fascinating to watch power shift without chaos. Just the truth, backed by evidence, had changed the dynamics. Personally, I felt a sense of closure. Months of stress, anxiety, and tension slowly dissolved. I could focus on my property again. Enjoy the land I had worked for. Plan small projects without worrying about arbitrary fines. But the biggest satisfaction came quietly. Not in a dramatic showdown. Not in someone being humiliated. But in seeing that standing firm with facts and law works. Persistence matters. Documentation matters. Knowing your rights matters. I didn't feel triumphant in a flashy way. I felt calm. Empowered. Relieved. The HOA learned their lesson. The community learned its lesson. And I learned mine. When power is unchecked, the only defense is knowledge, patience, and persistence. The ripple effect was still ongoing. Even months later, conversations about enforcement policies referenced my case. Other homeowners now had the courage to question rules that seemed overreaching. Abuse of authority slowed significantly. And that made all the difference. Months had passed since the injunction was finalized. Life returned to a rhythm I hadn't experienced in a long time. The driveway was clear. The trash bins stayed exactly where they belonged. No more stickers. No more letters. No more surprise visits. I walked my property one morning and realized something remarkable. I wasn't tense anymore. Every glance over my shoulder, every envelope in the mail, every unexpected knock no longer triggered anxiety. Peace had returned, and it was earned. I reflected on the entire journey. At first, it felt overwhelming. Letters, emails, trespassing, threats, emotional pressure. It seemed endless. Each time the HOA escalated, it chipped away at my calm. But slowly, step by step, I documented everything. Patience became my weapon. Knowledge became my shield. Persistence became the path to justice. And when I finally saw the results, the injunction, the public acknowledgement, the policy changes, I understood something deeply important. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it moves quietly. It shows up in court documents. It shows up in emails. It shows up in the understanding that authority must answer to the law. I thought about the ripple effect. Neighbors who had suffered silently were now aware of their rights. The community's culture began to shift. People started questioning enforcement policies instead of blindly accepting them. Fear had been replaced with awareness. I also realized that control, real control, is never about fear. It's about knowledge, fairness, and accountability. The HOA had learned that lesson. The board members who remained were careful, thoughtful, and measured in their actions. The power they once assumed they had was now anchored to accountability. On a personal level, I felt something even deeper than victory. I had defended my rights without losing my integrity. I had documented the truth without exaggeration. I had acted with patience instead of reacting impulsively. That lesson was priceless. Walking through my property that afternoon, I paused at the fence line. Clear boundaries. Clear ownership. Clear peace. I smiled. Not out of triumph. Not out of revenge. But out of relief, clarity, and a profound respect for the process that allowed justice to prevail. The HOA could no longer overreach. Rules had been rewritten. Boundaries had been enforced. And my life was mine again. Sometimes, standing up quietly and firmly does more than anger or confrontation ever could. Sometimes, persistence, preparation, and patience become the loudest voices in the room. And in this case, it was enough. Karma didn't roar. It wrote the rules. I learned that power and authority are meaningless when they aren't rooted in truth. I learned that fear can be replaced by knowledge. And I learned that justice, when pursued correctly, always finds its way. Finally, I was free. Finally, I was at peace. Finally, the story had a satisfying ending.